Dark metal. The name almost sounds like it's, well, too much. Overkill. Most metal tends to be dark, some not, but a lot of it does tend to have a darker, more evil overtone that has been blessed to it, whether it be by clergy or non-fans or, well, just people that want to make it sound cooler than everything else. Enter a band such as Tiamat with their new album, The Scarred People. But let's go backwards. Let's talk about Tiamat as a whole. The band itself is one of the principal founders of dark metal, one of the real big influences that the perhaps dark metal of today that is really getting a nice little popularity boost from a lot of the spooky kids of America and abroad. Well, without which, well, they might not be who they are today. Bands like Tiamat and the other bands from the early 90s, such as Samuel or Sentence, just to name a few, are really principal reminders that, well, dark metal's history is really traced in the trailblazing of the past, of separating themselves somewhat from the extreme, the death and black metal scenes in order to make something with a little bit more of an airy atmosphere that does have a certain doom and gloom to it, but doesn't always have the gloom. Tiamat has been able to prove that, and continues to prove it on this album. This is an album that definitely feels seamless, very similar to some of the albums of their past. However, there is definitely a lot of principal influences that are able to come out on The Scarred People. You can definitely tell that there's a little bit of the 80s in there, and you can also tell that they're able to kind of bring the 80s back to life here in the 2010s in a very raw and impassioned way, but also in a very poetic but powerful way. So, with that said, well, the era is definitely alive. The vocals definitely remind you of a, well, non-typo negative Peter Steele, and there is just an enlightened glow to this album that reminds you of past works such as Wild Honey, especially some of the airier passages where you can hear the faint sounds of birds chirping, which is something that you've heard a lot if you're a big fan of their earlier work. This is an album that will, since it is 4 years in the making, there is a lot at stake for the band, considering their last album was after an even larger margin of time. It had a lot to prove, and certainly did so with a lot of very, very keen praise. With this album, though, I think some people may feel a little bit brushed off, almost as though, well, we've heard this side of Tiamat before. We've heard the combination of some of their Elder Scrolls mixed in with this newer image that they kind of tattered on at the ending part of the 1990s and the beginning part of the 2000s, all the way up to their 2003 album, Prey. So the combination is actually something that feels, well, not only tired, but at some points in time, just a little bit predictable. However, this is a band that I assure you is still continuing to trailblaze, in a sense. They're continuing to showcase that the image that they were able to break away from, the side of metal that they were able to help create and diversify in the early part of the 1990s is still alive and well today, and that the bands that are perhaps cashing in on that trailblazing have a lot to be thankful for. There's definitely a debt of gratitude that's owed to these guys, and the Scarred People showcase the fact that Tiamat is a band that is still able to really rock hard, not to mention also write very impassioned songs, very, very deep lyrical songs that are enjoyed by many, many people. While the band themselves may have aged more than 20 years ever since their initial debut, this is certainly an album that showcases the fact that, well, the youth still remains in the music, the drive still remains in the music, and while this isn't going to naturally take your breath away like an album like Wild Honey did, or whether it be Clouds or any of the other myriad of albums and EPs in their back catalog, it still stands well on its own. This is almost like listening to metal history updated a little bit. It's almost like seeing what kind of has come from the trailblazing that has happened in the past. And almost like a friendly reminder that, well, not only does Tiamat still exist, but they still are a band that a lot of bands, aside from them, owe a tremendous debt to. This is one of those pleasant albums that you really enjoy in a certain way, and its seamless nature is something that helps execute the flow all the more. The flow, of course, of an album is something that is principally important, and something that I've spoken about numerous times. This is an album that's definitely able to keep that going. And considering the band is able to make daring leaps and bounds into the current by covering an artist such as Lana Del Rey, well, you can definitely tell that this is a band that also remains a little bit, well, their ear to the current, their ear to what is kind of going on in the world today, as far as music is concerned. While overall this may not strike you the same way as their past work, this is definitely not an album to overlook. This isn't one that you should rest your laurels on. This isn't one that you should skip simply because Tiamat's been releasing an album virtually every half-decade. No, instead, it's something that is a curious style of masterwork that you should definitely investigate and kind of take in and enjoy. It's kind of like a history lesson. And the history lesson is speaking to the fact that this is a band that continues to impress. I give this album a solid 7.75 to 8 out of 10. I really enjoyed the work. It's definitely one of those turn back the clock modes that makes me want to really revisit this band in heavy rotation. And hopefully that's the feeling that you're going to get from this as well. I got that same feeling in 2008 whenever their last album was recorded and released, and it just seems like every single time that a new album emerges from these guys, that's the underlying feeling that kind of comes from it. And whenever you have that kind of power, that a whole entire group of metal fans, or maybe even just a few, is willing to revisit and wants to revisit willingly your past discography and your past greatness, well, then you've definitely made a mark, and you've marked your territory on the metal community. So listen to this record, check it out, give it an opportunity, and then revisit some more of Tiamat's catalog. It's something that I personally recommend, and something that I hope that you yourself will do.